When I went to university, I struggled to keep up. Having to stay focused in class was a nightmare, and to make things worse, everything was taught in French, which was my third language. But the thing I dreaded the most was lunchtime. Not because the food was bad, but because what ensued was a terrible energy crash, which ruined my performance for the rest of the day. In this video I'm going to tell you exactly how I fixed my afternoon crash, which allowed me to finish at the top of my class and also got me into one of the most prestigious engineering programs in France. So, most of my mornings were actually quite productive. Before I started bulking up with oats, I actually felt quite good all the way until lunch. But then during lunch, I would go to the university restaurant with my friends, and I just want you to imagine for a second what kind of food would you get at a university restaurant. Or if you're working, what kind of food can you usually get for lunch? So for me it was always kind of like this. We would have an entree, a main course and a dessert. For entree we usually have some kind of a salad which was made from yesterday's leftovers. Then there would be main course, which was mostly carbs. Sometimes there would be meat, but very little meat and with some weird sauce that comes with it. But other days there was no meat at all because it was vegetarian day, and so we had some weird ultra processed vegan steak or something like that. And it would basically be rice, sometimes pizza, sometimes pasta with some creamy sauce made out of cereals or I don't even know what. And for dessert we would get some kind of a French patisserie, but that patisserie would not be really good quality. It would be some kind of carb crash eclair or something like that. The whole meal was mostly carbs, and as you can see on this picture, that's the actual picture that I took during one of the days, because I thought that the food was cool that day. Well, it was still, as you can see, mostly carbs. So it was usually a low protein, high carb processed food. So what would usually happen afterwards? I would finish the meal, I would go to class, and even if the class is super interesting to me, like at the time it was signal processing and circuits, I really enjoyed this class. But then I actually sat down and started taking notes, but like 20 minutes later, my eyes just start closing. All of a sudden, I find everything that the professor is saying super boring, even though it was supposed to be interesting, and it literally felt like torture, because I was sitting like that, I was slumping on my chair, and then my eyes would just close, like physically they would close. I couldn't keep them open, but I had to force myself to keep them open. Like, this, I remember I watched Tom and Jerry when I was little, and there was this scene where he was falling asleep and he had to put matches under his eyelids in order to keep his eyes open. And I literally felt like that. And it felt horrible. Like I felt like this huge lump of something in my stomach which was sucking energy out of everything. And at the time I didn't know why it was happening to me, and I thought that it was just how I was digesting food. And this lethargic state would usually last between 2 and 4 hours, which means that the whole afternoon was basically wasted. And this was ruining my productivity and also ruining my dreams of becoming an engineer, because in France, if you get a bachelor's, you are technically a technician, which is not the same thing as an engineer, and I really wanted to be an engineer. So this was so horrible for me mentally that I actually started to be like, hold on, I need to fix this ASAP. And one day I stumbled upon a YouTube short with Andrew Huberman where he was saying something about the carb crash and how high glycemic products are gonna make you less productive, and I was like, okay, that's interesting. So I started doing my research, and I've discovered that our eating habits are completely misaligned from the evolutionary standpoint. We were not supposed to eat like this much carbs in one go and then sit down. How people lived 10,000 years ago. It was basically you go on a hunt, you bring home food, and usually it was high protein, pretty low carb. There was like, sometimes you would get honey and berries, but most of the time the carbs came from starchy root vegetables, which were actually very low on carbs at the time. Before we started selecting them, they were all basically like wild carrots. There is very few carbohydrates in them. But now, after we've developed agriculture and we switched away from high protein meals into low protein, ultra processed carbohydrates, our body was getting way too much carbs at once. And not only that, we also stopped moving. We switched from physical work to intellectual work, which prevented these carbs from actually taking into our muscles to get used right away. You get this spike of carbohydrates because they all get into your bloodstream at once, because you got this huge meal of rice. Rice has a very high glycemic index. In fact, white rice actually has a higher glycemic index because it has less fructose than sugar. So you get this spike in blood sugar, and because it's dangerous for you to have high blood sugar, you can ask anyone with diabetes how their body reacts to this. Everything is breaking down when your blood sugar is elevated for a long period of time. So your pancreas naturally starts to take it out. It secretes insulin into your blood, and insulin is signaling to your liver to take out sugar and store it as glycogen. But because this system is not perfect, it's a feedback loop, which was not designed to handle modern amounts of carbohydrates, you actually take out way too much sugar, and now you have a low blood sugar. Now there is actually not enough for your brain to function properly. And for the next couple of hours you get this huge dip in sugar levels, and you no longer can supply enough energy to function correctly. And this condition is called hypoglycemia, and this is why you cannot focus anymore and your brain falls asleep. So now that we've identified the problem, we can start to look for a solution. And what I did back then was to look at the source of the problem. And the source of the problem was the evolutionary mismatch between how we were supposed to eat when we evolved and what we're eating now. And so I stopped eating at the campus restaurant and I started cooking my own food. And how I did this in order to improve logistics, I actually stacked together the previous day's dinner and the preparation of the next day's lunch. So whenever I would come home, I would usually cook my dinner, and together with that I would basically double the portion and take half of it aside and put it in a box for the next day, and that would be my lunch. And what I did, I removed most of the carbohydrates and I replaced them with a lot of high quality protein. Instead of having this weird vegetarian steak made out of seaweeds and God knows what, I actually started cooking some real steak. So usually it would be 4 boiled eggs plus 1 or 2 ground beef steaks of 100 grams each. And to supplement that, I would add in some kind of a salad or broccoli or some kind of vegetable which is low in starch and high in fiber. And to finish it off, for carbs, I would take a fruit or two, so maybe something like an apple or a banana. And this was a game changer because now I was finally eating foods which are aligned with our evolution. The single ingredient animal products supplied me with all the protein I would ever need, plus the micronutrients for better brain function, while the fiber in the vegetables was keeping my gut microbiome healthy, which is essential for your brain function. Now some of you may say, well, that's weird, you replaced the slow starchy carbs with sugar from fruit, that's not good. But here's a reason for that. First of all, I eat much less carbs when I eat it in fruit than I eat in rice, because fruit are smaller, they may taste more sweet, but that's because they're higher in sugar and low in complex carbohydrates, but the total carb amount is much lower. And also because I ate so much protein and fat and fibers, the sugars from fruit are actually taking much longer to get absorbed, and this results in me getting all of the energy I need but without any sign of carb crash. Another thing that I've discovered a little later was that actually walking after a meal was insanely effective to reduce carb crash and improve insulin sensitivity. So there was this study that basically showed that just by taking a 10-minute walk after lunch improved insulin sensitivity by 20%, which is an insane improvement. And this basically happens because your cells, when you sit down, are basically kind of dormant. They don't take out energy from your blood. Your muscles are inactive, so they just don't bother. But when you start moving, your muscle cells start to take energy from your blood. So in your muscle cells, you've got these organelles which are responsible for transport of nutrients across the cell membrane, and they're basically like the bridges. When your cells are inactive, most of these bridges are closed, so you cannot bring much glucose into your cells. But once they get a stimulus, these bridges open and they bring glucose into the cell. And the nerdy name for this is insulin-independent glucose transport. And what this means is that your cells are helping your pancreas take sugar from your blood into the cells. And this can really ease your carb crash a lot. And this is what I've been doing for a while now. It only takes 10 minutes, it's a short walk, everyone can do this and it's also nice. So this one change in what I eat for lunch was the 80-20 rule of nutrition for better performance. And to this day, this is still the most effective single change you can make to improve your brain fog and reduce this weird crash that you get in the afternoon. So yeah, I hope this was helpful and I'll see you next time.